Good morning. Welcome to class. We're going to go ahead and start with our do now. You're going to have approximately 5 minutes to get it done. You may go ahead and begin working on your do now. When you get it done, get out your Beat the Beast packet and get ready for class. You have about 2 more minutes to finish up. All right, you should be done with your do now. Additionally, at this time, if you have not already, grab the additional piece of paper that is on the teacher's desk. It's a uh, quick flashcard setup for the types of governments. I know this was an area that some people really struggled in. You can use this to study at home. It's a great study guide. I provided it for you. Use that to study with tonight. It will really help you with your different types of government. So started today. Today is Monday, the 2nd of 2022. That's correct. We only have 8 days left to the EOC, and it's a Beat the Beast Monday. So let's get started. Agenda for the day, we just got done with the do now. We're currently in the welcome agenda and expectations. Next is our standards, objectives, and essential questions, followed by the beast. Expectations today is to have a great class, learn something new, have fun, follow champs, and of course we want to win, beat the teacher. Let's talk about champs today. Communication is going to be at level 0. If you need help, you're going to raise your hand. Your activity today is taking the Beat the Beast packet or working on the Beat the Beast packet. Your movement will be safe classroom movement. Participation, you are working individually. If we can do that, it will lead to success. And of course, we want to win. Teacher. Our standards are from 3.1. We're going to compare different forms of government, including direct democracy, representative democracy, socialism, communism, monarchy, oligarchy, and autocracy. We want to compare parliamentary, federal, confederal, and unitary systems of government. Additionally, we need to illustrate the structure and function of the 3 branches of government established in Articles 1, 2, and 3 with corresponding powers of government in the United States as established in the Constitution. And finally, for 3.4, we will identify the relationship and division of power between the federal government and the state government. Our objectives are to prepare for the EOC, fix our mistakes, and remaster our standards. First things first, we're going to be able to differentiate the different forms of government based on political philosophy of organization of structure. So you need to be able to understand each definition of government. For example, direct democracy means the people rule. They vote and make decisions by themselves. If that's true, popular sovereignty means rule by the people. Where would we gauge popular sovereignty? Well, let's find out. If people are ruling for themselves and making decisions for themselves, then absolutely, they're going to have full popular sovereignty. That means full freedom. People get to decide on laws, people get to decide on rules, and they vote for themselves. Remember, direct democracy doesn't really exist in the world. It existed in ancient Athens, but it was not very effective because everybody had to vote on every decision. And that's a lot of time, and it's extremely consuming in what you can do. It may work in a very small society, but not in a large one like ours. Now you're going to go through and you're going to try to determine where the popular sovereignty gauge will be for the remaining governments. We'll go through them together after you've begun. All right, so watch that timer, get after it. All right, so you should now be done filling out the chart. Let's go through it together. A representative democracy is really the same thing as a republic. In fact, they are the same thing. It's where the legislative branch is chosen by the people's vote to make laws. And an executive branch is also chosen by the people's vote to enforce the laws. So we're in a representative democracy or a republic. We get to make decisions on how our government's run, and we hand that power to those officials, to our legislative branch and our executive branch. Let's see what this type of freedom would be. Yeah, it's absolutely going to be a four, right? We have given some of our power over to rule us to other people, and they're making decisions with our best interest. And if we don't like that, what they've done, we can always elect somebody else. A monarchy is where a single king or queen runs a country. They're chosen by birthright, so it's passed down in a family bloodline, father to son, father to daughter, so on and so forth. And in that kind of system, you have no freedoms. Your decisions are made by the monarch. The monarch is chosen by birthright. There's really no decisions for any individuals. The parliamentary monarchy. In a parliamentary monarchy, the legislative branch has taken over the power, and the king or queen sits simply as a ceremonial piece, not really a ruler. So this is a three because the executive branch is picked by the legislative branch, so there's really no separation between the legislative and the executive branch. However, the king or queen has very little power, mostly in ceremonial purposes. Autocracy. Autocracy, one ruler has all the power. It's like an absolute monarchy, except there's no king. Typically, this is a dictator. They have all the power. An example of this would be Russia right now under Putin. He has all the power. An oligarchy is a small group of people who run a country. These are typically very wealthy families. So Russia, typically referred to as an oligarchy. However, Putin has absorbed most of the power in that system, so it's more of an autocracy today. But this would have been Italy back in the 1500s. Next is socialism. The government controls much of the property and businesses of the people, and they redistribute wealth depending on what they think the need is. You have about a 1 in socialism because the government's going to make decisions for you. And finally, communism is going to be a 0. The government runs everything. All property and businesses are owned by the government. So these are difficult if you don't study them. If you study them, this is very, very, very easy. Make sure that you take time to go over this at home and understand what you're asking for and where people's power comes from, where does rule from people come from. All right, it's time to beat the beast. What do an absolute monarchy and an autocracy have in common? All right, so what do an absolute monarchy and autocracy have in common? What do you think? Correct answer is A. So if you got A, very good job. All right, so now we're on to 3.2. When you identify the different forms of government based on its political philosophy or organizational structure. So you'll be able to apply your understanding to each definition of government. When we say weaker state, we mean gives out. So what are these? You need to be able to describe what types of forms of government, systems of government, forms of government. Don't get this confused with systems. These are forms of government. What types of forms of government are we looking at? right, so let's go over this. A strong central government that delegates orders to the weaker state or regional governments. So what type of system of government or form of government is this? Well, this is going to be a unitary system, and that's really hard to see. It's a unitary system. A unitary system of government is where the central government has all the power and the states are very, very weak. This typically works in smaller countries. The United Kingdom is definitely a unitary system of government. The central government makes all the decisions. The states have little to no power. We live in a federal system. Our power is shared between the central, national, and regional governments. So between the states and the federal government, that's where our power is shared. And each level of our government has three branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. So when we think about the federal system, when you think about power is shared. And last is the confederal system. That's where we have weak central government has no real power over the state or regional governments who are stronger. So the states have all the power where the central government has none. When we think about a confederal system, we need to think about the United States prior to the writing of the Constitution. This is the United States under the Articles of Confederation. The states had all the power, the central government had none. So the states could decide they didn't want to follow law if they didn't want to, and they weren't enforced in any way, shape, or form. All right, time to beat the beast. The table below shows a comparison of two different systems of government, a comparison of federal and unitary systems of government. Canada and the United States, unitary systems, France and the United Kingdom. Which information completes this table? So you want to think about what's going to fill in the left side and the right side of the chart. All right, so let's see what the answer is. Which information completes this table? Well, it's not B, it's not C, and it's not D. Correct answer is A. In a federal system, power is shared. That's the word we always want to look for. And in a unitary system, the power is delegated, meaning the federal government is given all of the power and they decide what the state. All right. So we need to recognize the structure and identify the powers and compare the roles and responsibilities of the three branches in the federal government. So remember, we have three branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. We know that the main branch of the legislative branch, the main job of the legislative branch is to make laws. The main job of the executive branch is to enforce laws, and the main job of the judicial branch is to interpret the laws. So let's think first about structure. The structure of the legislative branch is bicameral, meaning we have two houses. We have a Senate and House of Representatives. The House of Representatives is run by the Speaker of the House, and the Senate is run by the Vice President. When the Vice President is not there, we have the President pro tempore, or President for a time. The executive branch is the President, the Vice President, and the Cabinet, which is the secretaries of each executive department. So we think about the executive, the Secretary of the State, or the Secretary of Defense, or the Secretary of Homeland Security. All of those positions are in the Cabinet. Next, we have the judicial branch. It's their job to interpret the laws. We think of our 9 Supreme Court justices, followed by our federal courts, which include appellate courts and circuit courts. Now, what you're going to do is think about what powers each of these branches has. So think back to where you find the powers, and I want you to write that down as well. Where would I find these powers listed out? What part of the Constitution would I find it written out in? So you're going to go ahead and start with the legislative branch, then work into the executive and judicial. All right, let's do it. So the main powers of the legislative branch include approval of the president's appointments and treaties, coining and printing money, declaring war, the elastic clause, which allows the legislative branch to make laws in order to do their job, impeachment, naturalization and immigration, and the regulation of trade. The executive branch is in charge of our armed forces, our foreign relations, our homeland security. The president can use executive orders that are followed by the executive branch. The president has the power to veto and appoint judges. And finally, the judicial branch, they have the power of court order. They can force you to come to trial. They can ask you to stop doing something or demand that you do something. And then judicial review. They can decide if something is unconstitutional. I want you to circle the checks and balances that you see. So circle the checks and balances that you see. You should circle appointments and approvals. Approval of presidential appointments and treaties, circle that. Also, you need to circle impeachment. For executive branch, you're going to circle the veto power and appoint judges. And for the judicial branch, I want you to circle judicial review. And inside the circle, I want you to put ×2 to remind us that the judicial branch can find something unconstitutional in both the legislative and executive branches. I'll give you a few minutes to write everything down on the slide. All right. That should be enough time. We're moving on. Skill 2. What are the requirements for being in government? The legislative branch at the federal level, at the state level, for the House, for the Senate, for the executive branch and judicial branch. We know that you have to be 25 years old. You must live in the district you represent, and you must be a citizen for 7 years in order to work in the federal branch of government. In the state of Florida, you must be 21. You must live in the state of Florida for 2 years, and you must be a resident of the district you represent. To be in the Senate at the federal level, you need to be 30 years old. You must live in the state you represent, and you must be a citizen for 9 years. For our state, you must be 21, live in the state you represent, and there are no other restrictions. So remember, the Senate of Florida, there are no other restrictions other than that you live in the state and you be 21. You do not have to live in the area you represent. You do if you want to be a member of the Florida House of Representatives, but not a Florida state senator. The executive branch, or the President of the United States of America, you must be 35 years old, live in the country for 14 years, and be a natural-born citizen. In order to be the governor of Florida, you must be 30 years old, be a resident of Florida for 7 years, and live in the state. And finally, the judicial branch. There is no age requirement. There is no residency requirement, because remember, the president is chosen, or the judicial branch is chosen by the president and approved by the Senate. They're not going to pick a baby to be in charge of the judicial branch. They're going to pick somebody who has lots of experience and lots of time working in the federal system before they select them. For the state of Florida, our judges must be under the age of 70, live in our state, and 10 years in law practice chosen by the governor and approved by the Florida Senate. I'm going to give you some time to write this down. At any time that you need to pause this video in order to get information, if I'm moving too quickly, you can pause the video. Take about 1 more minute. All right. Time to beat the beast. Answer this following question. The newspaper headline below describes an event in U.S. history. Cybercrime treaty approved. Which parts of the national government participated in the process described in the newspaper headline? Is it A, Senate and President, B, Supreme Court and President, C, House of Representatives and Senate, or D, Supreme Court and House of Representatives? Make sure you have your answer down. Let's find out what the answer is. There's a treaty. So think about who approves treaties. Correct answer. Senate and President. So punctuation is very important. Define the system of government, of federalism, and analyze how it limits government's powers. Define the system of federalism and analyze how it limits the government's power. So federalism is a system where we split the government's power into 3 different levels. Like a cake. We have the federal government, the state government, and the local government. How does federalism lead to the limits of government? Remember, no one government has too much power, and they each have their own specific jobs to do. I'll give you a couple seconds to write that down. Moving on. When you compare the concurrent, enumerated, reserved, and delegated powers as they relate to the state and federal government. So remember that delegated and enumerated powers are the same. Their federal gives orders and responsibilities to states, and the powers that are listed in the Constitution for the federal government. If Concurrent are powers that are shared between the federal government and the state government. That's where federalism comes from. And reserved are powers given specifically to the states by the Constitution. They are the ones that are not listed for the federal government, given to us by the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Powers not listed in the U.S. Constitution are reserved for the states. So think about things like driver's license, marriage licenses. So I think about which powers fall into which branch and which level. All right. So the federal government sets up the Common Core for education and delegates that states use it. Government has a Supreme Court case, and the decision delegates states how to follow it. So when we think about Supreme Court cases like Brown versus Board of Education, it said that you could not discriminate based on color in public schools. It ended segregation. Enumerated powers like coin money, measurements, regulate trade, and direct the military, those all belong only to the federal government. Concurrent powers, including making laws, collecting taxes, and the general welfare, those are shared by all three levels of government, even local government. And then finally, reserved powers. Reserved powers are those just given to the states. Things like education, elections, transportation, trade, and crime within the state, marriages, and driver's licenses. I'll give you a few minutes to write this down. All right. Moving on. Skill number 3, we need to analyze the 6th article of the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution's role in federalism. The Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. What does this mean in regards to federalism? We need to think about the Supremacy Clause. The Supremacy Clause means that the federal government, by the Constitution, trumps the others. If it comes down to federal versus state, the U.S. Constitution beats all. So federal law supersedes state law in every case. If it's in the Constitution, then it will be followed first. answer this Don't answer this question because it's not a question. Skill number 4, we need to analyze the 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution's role in federalism. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. In other words, what does the 10th Amendment mean? And if you need to remember, powers not given to the federal government are reserved for the states. We're going to push them out. Powers not given to the federal government are reserved for the states. All right. Which means any powers not written in the Constitution for the federal government are reserved for the states or the people. Sets up reserved powers. So this is where our reserved powers for the states come from. This is really what makes us a federal system, by reserving powers for the states, but also by sharing power between the state and the federal government. That's what makes us a federalist system. If all the power was only held within the Constitution and it was only held by the federal government, then we'd be a unitary system of government. So this is what sets us apart. All right. So we need to label the chart for ordinances, statutes, and acts. So we need to attach those words, ordinance, statutes, and acts, to the different levels of government. So federal laws are called what? State laws are called what? And local laws are called what? Should be pretty easy. One of them is very similar to what describes it. One of these is very similar to what describes it. All right, and that was quick, I know. We'll see if you did it. Federal laws are called federal acts, state laws are called statutes, and local laws are called ordinances. So acts, statutes, ordinances. Time to beat the beast. Which statement describes a similarity between the state and federal governments under the U.S. Constitution? Which statement describes a similarity between the state and federal governments under the U.S. Constitution? All right, let's see how we did. A similarity. It's not A. It's not B. It's not D. Correct answer is C. Well done. All right. Moving on to 3.5, but we will start that tomorrow. Thank you guys. Hope you had a great class period. If you need to go back and look at anything, now's the time to do that. I hope you were following all of the instructions from your substitute teacher. I will be receiving a report on behavior. Thank you guys. Have a great day.